Now it is my honor to introduce the next governor of the great state of Kansas, Kris Kobach.
Thank you so much, and thanks, Bob, for those really kind words. Bob didn't tell you that another great accomplishment is I persuaded Bob to be our treasurer for our campaign. So I'm very, very happy about that. It's great to be back with you guys here at the Pachyderm Club. Last time I was here, we had a little ruckus with some people. Some of you may remember that came in and had a difference of opinion, which is, I welcome a difference of opinion. That's what politics is all about. But I appreciate your policy of cordial debate and respect for people's differing points of view. But you know, in my view, there are some things that are just absolutely 100% right, and I am not going to yield an inch when it comes to defending those things. Thanks. You know, Bob was talking about some of the places I'd been in my life, and I did spend some time on the East Coast after I grew up in Topeka. My family came to Topeka when I was 7 years old. I was born in Wisconsin, and my dad had a chance to buy the Buick dealership in Topeka. That was back when one person could buy a car dealership. Nowadays, it takes a ton of money to get a car dealership. But anyway, brought the family to Topeka and grew up there, went to Washburn Rural High School, and just absolutely loved. I just fell in love with Kansas. I'm an avid hunter and outdoorsman, camping, hiking. If it's outdoors, I'm doing it. And just sort of fell in love with my state. And, when I was at places like Harvard and Yale Law School, a lot of my classmates, you get that on your resume, you can write your own ticket. So they were going to San Francisco, New York, Washington, and getting paid a ton of money to be in these law firms. And a lot of people just sort of assume that's what you do. I mean, if you can, why not? And I was like, no, I'm going back to Kansas. You don't understand. That's my home. That's where I want to live. And, you talk to people in places like that on the East Coast, they kind of think of Kansas as flyover country. They joke about it. And, we know, and people who come and visit us, our friends from outside of Kansas who come and visit us, there is something special, something magical about our state. And it's the people, and it's also the place too. I mean, I think Kansas is just unrivaled beauty as one of the places to live in America. But more than that, it is our people. Kansans are honest, they're hardworking, they are friendly, they are intelligent, and they're principled. And that's just, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, or I mean, you guys know it's true. And so that's why it was like, sure, I had these opportunities, but I was always coming back home. And that's why I, made my career here as a law professor and then as a father of our girls. And they're super proud to be Kansas born. You talk to them about their state and they sound like a commercial. They're just, crazy about Kansas. But it is true that I do think that the place that I know I'm going to stay in until I die, and the place that my kids are in love with, it needs to stay a place not only that's beautiful and has great people, but it needs to be a place where you can grow a business, a place where you can exercise your Second Amendment rights, a place where the unborn are protected. It needs to be a place that has good government too. And that's one of the reasons why I decided I'm going to get in this race for governor, because I do see some things under threat. I do see that the politicians in Topeka are not living up to the high standards of the people of Kansas right now. And so it's time for a change. I mean, we've all seen it before, right? Politicians everywhere are sometimes less than we expect them to be. But what's going on in Topeka is just outrageous. We always see them waiting. They come into session in January. And then January goes by, February goes by, March comes along. They still haven't passed anything significant. Then April comes along and May, and suddenly there's this mad rush to do all the business. I thought lawyers were procrastinators. Man, try politicians. And then there's this mad rush to throw everything together, and they end up producing some complete garbage and putting it on the governor's desk. And that's exactly what happens year after year. And then the politicians, the legislators say, oh, we don't have time. We got to go home. We got to go back to our jobs. We can't do anything more. We got to leave. And so you have things like this outrageous $1.2 billion tax hike that the legislature foisted upon the people of Kansas. It is outrageous, and raising taxes has got to stop in Kansas. And it's just unbelievable. I'm going to talk more specifically about taxes in a minute. But there are three broad themes that I've been talking about since yesterday when I launched my campaign, and we wanted to make sure the timing was perfect, that you guys invited me to be a speaker today so we could come right down to Sedgwick County as quickly as possible. But there are three broad themes. These are not, oftentimes you'll hear me talking about election security, and I'll happily take any questions you have on that because we're still engaged in a big battle on that. And I talk about gun rights a lot because I'm a big gun guy, and I love our firearms rights. And I'll take questions on that, and of course I'm as pro-life as they get, and I'd love to talk about that. But I want to thank you. But I want to talk about some themes that you might not have heard where I stand on in regard to the upcoming race for governor, and in regard to what's going on in Topeka. So the three areas that I want to talk about are corruption, taxation, and illegal immigration. Now you've heard me talk about that, but I'm going to talk specifically about Kansas. So corruption. There's a crisis of leadership in Topeka, and part of the problem in Topeka is that you have people who have been there too long. I mean, let me give you an example. Anthony Hensley, Senate Minority Leader in Topeka in the Kansas legislature. Anthony Hensley was first elected when Gerald Ford was president, and I was 8 years old. Gerald Ford died about 11 years ago, and I am 51 now. I think it's time to go. You've got a culture, you've got a situation in Topeka where some legislators make it a career rather than a calling. Our founding fathers envisioned serving in the Congress, and the same principles apply to a state legislature, as something that a citizen legislator would do. You're a citizen, you become a legislator for a brief period of time, and you return to being a citizen. And so one of the reasons we don't have term limits in our federal constitution is there was no culture of career politics back then. The average tenure of a member of Congress at the time our nation was founded, and when the first Congress was seated in 1789, was 1.5 terms, 3 years. Then they just didn't want to stay any longer. They wanted to get back to being a normal citizen and not having the burden of serving in office. But for a variety of reasons, our culture has now changed. And so many people serve, I think, way beyond their sell-by date. Their shelf life has long expired. And what do you do when you see something in your refrigerator that says sell-by and it was last week? You throw it out. That's what we need to do. Throw them out. But sometimes it's hard to throw them out because they may be tied to some very powerful special interests. They may have a huge advantage. We all know this. In politics, incumbency is everything. The incumbent always has the advantage. And so as a result, it's very hard for someone to challenge them, someone who might even be a better candidate, a better representative of the Republican Party, someone truer to Republican principles, doesn't have a chance oftentimes against an incumbent. And so that's why I believe that in Kansas, we need term limits. We absolutely need them. Now, we have them for only one office in Kansas, governor. The governor is limited to 2 terms, and I think that's just fine. In fact, I think it would be wrong if governors served more than 2 terms. But we don't have it for the other statewide offices. If I wanted to serve as Secretary of State for the rest of my life, probably could until somebody beat me in an election. Attorney General doesn't have it. So at a minimum, we need to impose term limits on the statewide elected offices. But we also need to impose it on the legislature. Did you know that Kansas is one of the only states west of the Mississippi that doesn't have term limits on its state legislators? I think that's a shame. Look, and the argument that's made by the other side is, experience. You're going to lose those experienced people who know so much. Come on. If you bone up on the issues, you should know the issues before you take office as a state legislator. And if you still haven't learned it by then, you'll know it by a couple months into your first year of office. So the notion that we have to keep people like Anthony Hensley around for 40 years is just silly. We don't. We need new blood. We need it to be easy for people to get in, to have cycling in office, both in the legislature and in the executive offices. The other thing on the theme of corruption I want to talk about is the revolving door of politics. We hear about it a lot in Washington, but it happens in Topeka too. Somebody serves in the legislature, then they resign, and then a day later they are lobbying and getting paid a lot of money to persuade their former colleagues. That's wrong too, because what they're doing is they're profiting from the relationship, from the office that was given to them by their constituents. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying a person can't become a lobbyist and that all lobbyists are bad. There are a lot of great lobbyists, many of whom are friends of mine, who know their stuff and know it well. But I do think we can slow that revolving door down, and we can impose some ethical standards. And one thing I think needs to be done is just a time limit. If you leave the legislature, there should be a certain number of years that pass before you come back in and start telling your buddies, this is how I want you to vote, and getting paid lots of money to tell your buddies, this is how I want you to vote. If you want to be a lobbyist in Missouri for a couple years before you come back to Kansas, go ahead. Be a lobbyist in Nebraska for a couple years, go ahead. But let's slow down that revolving door and make sure that the legislators are putting the interest of Kansas taxpayers first before they put the interests of some of the bigger corporations and other entities and special interests that have these lobbyists. The second topic I want to talk about, and I want to leave a lot of time for questions, so I'm not going to stay up here yakking too long, is taxation. Now, as you know, we had an obscene tax increase on Tuesday, $1.2 billion. It was a disaster. Now more than ever, we need someone in the governor's mansion who is going to fight against these tax increases. Now, I understand Governor Brownback did veto them, and I applaud those vetoes. That was a bold move, and it was absolutely the right move. But to really fight against these tax increases, we need to do more than just veto them when they come. We have to cut spending in order to keep our taxes low. And that was the... Look, I'm not the first person to say this, but Kansas does not have a revenue problem. Kansas has a spending problem. You know, even before this obscene tax increase, Kansas was already taking in a record amount of revenue and was spending a record amount. The story that you're hearing in the media is that that the well was drying up. There was no money coming in. The money was trickling down. The incoming revenue was slowing down. That is false. We took in more money last year than we've ever taken in before. What was happening, and this is where the story was twisted by the fake news media, is there were projections. Oh, we think X number of dollars are going to come in next month, and the projection was the actual intake was less than the projection. But we're still taking in a record amount of money. And so the notion that the well was drying up and we had to raise taxes on the Kansas taxpayer is 100% false. The amount of revenue coming in was growing. So think about this. The legislature then says, well, we had to raise taxes on Kansans. We had no choice. We had to do it. There was a projected budget deficit, and obviously we had to go to the taxpayers. Think about it in your family situation. Normal Kansans would never handle their budgets that way. Let's say we've all had this situation in our lives at one time or another. Let's say ends are tight, things are tight, and your ends are not meeting up. Your means are not meeting up with your ends as far as your budget goes, and the credit card bill starts going up. What do? You sit down with your spouse and you say, okay, what can we cut? What expenditure can we put off? Can we skip the family vacation this year? Can we cut some expenditures to make our ends meet? We don't just say, hey, let's just keep running up the credit card, or hey, let me go to my boss and tell him at gunpoint he has to give me more money, which by the way is exactly what the legislature did. You are the boss of the legislature, and when I say gunpoint, I mean you have no choice. The legislature didn't ask you, Kansans, would you like to pay us more money? They forced you, they confiscated your income to pay for their extra expenses. It's so easy to spend someone else's money, isn't it? That's exactly what they did. They forced you to spend that money. So they passed this tax increase. $1.2 billion increase over 2 years, the largest in Kansas history. It's outrageous for a number of reasons. It's an increase on all levels of income. It doesn't just hit the rich. You know, I love how they call anyone who pays more taxes the rich. Oh, did you know, by the way, that the tax increase now means that if you earn $60,000 or more, you are now in the highest tax bracket, you're rich, according to the Kansas legislature. That is ridiculous. The highest tax bracket kicks in at $60,000. The other thing that's outrageous about it is it's retroactive. So we've been paying state sales tax on our income for the past 6 months, the first almost 6 months of 2017, that we've already paid a certain percentage. This tax retroactively grabs some of your income from January through June as well. That's outrageous. But the biggest outrage is that it comes on the heels of that massive increase in our state sales taxes 2 years ago. Now, if you look at that where we stand compared to other states on sales taxes, we are now right up in the top, certainly the top 10. I can't remember, I think we were like 9th or something like that. We're really high up there. Now, most of the other states that are up in that top tier of sales taxes, they're zero income tax states. They have a good excuse because there's zero income tax. That's not us, is it? So we have high sales taxes and now really high income taxes. It is outrageous and it has got to stop, and we have to roll back that $1.2 billion increase as soon as possible. Now, and I promise you, if I'm elected governor, I'm going to fight every increase, and I'm going to fight to roll back the tax levels in Kansas. It is outrageous what has happened. I mean, I still can't quite believe it that they did this. By the way, there were proposals that the legislators rejected. There's a group of conservative senators and representatives. They call themselves the Truth Caucus in Topeka, and it's a good name because they tell the truth. They had a proposal that they put up for a vote as an amendment in the Senate. It would have balanced the budget without raising taxes a dime. And I think that proposal fell 2 votes short in the Kansas Senate. There was an option on the table to balance the budget, even with the increases in spending that we've seen over the past few years. It would have not increased them further, and the Senate voted it down. So when the legislators tell you they had no choice, they are lying. They had a choice, and they made the wrong choice. But the media won't hear that. You won't hear that in the media. You'll read, oh, the legislators faced this deficit. There was no way to close the deficit gap. They had to raise taxes. And it's just sort of presented as accepted fact. That is false. It is not fact. They had an ability to balance the budget without raising taxes. Now, one of the things that that I think needs to be mentioned is there has been a real failure in Topeka to cut the budget. And one thing I set out to do was that I'd heard this myth all through my life. When I was at Harvard, I was a political science major, and you hear this all your life if you're involved in politics, like everybody in this room is in one way or another. Oh, you can't cut government. Government is always going to grow. Nothing grows like a government program. It has a life forever. It's impossible to cut. And so when I came in as Secretary of State in 2011, I said to my leadership in the agency, we are going to try something. We are going to see if we can actually flatline our budget so that it doesn't go above fiscal year 2011, and even better, we'll see if we can make some cuts. And I meant real cuts, not fake cuts like you sometimes hear where a cut is just a reduction in the rate of growth, but a real cut so that we are spending less next year than we spent this year, and we're spending less the year after that than we spent in that year. And so we did it. I was amazed at how well we were able to do it. We did much better than flatlining. And that's what this chart is all about. So the Secretary of State agency spending is this blue line right here. We started at $7 million in fiscal year 2011, which was the year that was halfway over when I came in. And then the last fiscal year that we have numbers for is fiscal year 2016, we're at $4.7 million. So we cut $2.3 million. That's more than a 30% decrease in the spending of an agency. I proved it can be done. Now, meanwhile, look what happened at the total state government. Total state spending started at $14.7 billion, went down for a couple years, then shot up to $15.5 billion. So it went up almost $1 billion, about $800 million, while we were cutting our agency. The rest of state government was growing. That is the problem right there. If they had flatlined it, if they just kept it on this dotted line, then that flat line would have kept us at $14.7 billion. We wouldn't have had a budget deficit this year. we would have had a huge surplus. And the debate wouldn't have been, should we raise taxes or not? The debate should have been, well, how much of this money will we return to the Kansas taxpayer? That's what I want the debate to be. You flatline the budget and you return money to the taxpayer. So you might say, well, how'd you do it, Kris? You must have gone in there and slashed and burned and fired people, put them out on the streets, and left them hungry and crying. No, I didn't. What we did is took advantage of a demographic fact that is a huge opportunity of historic proportions, and that is the baby boomer generation is retiring. We didn't have to do mass firings in the agency. We cut the size of my agency's payroll, the number of employees, by 18%. But we did it through natural attrition. Every time somebody retired, I had my deputies see if we can take their job responsibilities and give them to other people who are still in the office. Let's see if we can go without filling the position. And they did that again and again and again. So when all these people left because they were retiring, or some people left because they had a better opportunity in the private sector, we didn't refill their position with somebody else. And in that way, we shrunk government. And that needs to be done statewide. We've proven it can be done. Now, to give you just an idea how much potential there is to save money by cutting state payroll, and I don't mean cutting the amount they're paid, I mean by cutting the number of people on the payroll, let me give you this statistic. Some of you may have heard it, and that is if you take state and local employees combined, Kansas is third highest in the country in the number of state and local government employees per capita. Third highest in the country. This is not California. This is not Illinois. This is not New York. Third highest in the country, and that's 32% above the national average. That means we have an excess of state employees. That means that's the first place government should be looking to cut. And that's what I'm going to do. We're going to come in and we're going to say, anytime anyone leaves, we don't fill the position. Every agency. The only exception to that rule is in law enforcement, because as our law enforcement brothers here know and sisters, in law enforcement there are certain ratios you're supposed to hold. You have to have X number of citizens, you should have a certain number of patrolmen per citizen. So with the one exception of law enforcement agencies, every other agency, when somebody leaves, you don't fill the position. And in doing that, we should be able to cut the size of Kansas number of employees by 18% over the same period of time, just like we did in my agency. The other thing you might say is, well, you must have cut services, Kris. No, actually, we increased the amount of things we are doing in the agency. And one of the things we're doing now, as you know, is we're prosecuting voter fraud. Only state in America where the Secretary of State can prosecute voter fraud. And we just had our 9th conviction, if you didn't read it. But what we did do is the services that we are providing, we're trying to do it more efficiently. So we've tried to get away from snail mail entirely. We're trying to do everything through internet transactions. We're trying to do it through email transactions. So those of you who have LLCs or S corporations, and every year you have to do your annual report and keep your LLC status active, we try to encourage people. We give you a $5 incentive to do it over the internet rather than doing it through a check in the snail mail. It's a little incentive, but it works. More and more people have been going to the internet that way, and as a result, we're able to shrink the number of employees. When people leave in that part of the business services part of the office, we don't have to fill the positions because it's happening over the internet and doesn't require human eyeballs to see those checks and type in those numbers. Another thing that's important to note about this is that you can choose practicality over luxury. Oftentimes in government, they have a project, they take a bid, and it's some big name. Oracle is going to provide the software. That was an example of something that recently happened in Kansas. Oracle got this huge contract, and it turned out they weren't meeting the needs of Kansas government, and we found we could get the job done for less than 20% of the price by choosing someone who was not a big name, but who could do it just as well. Oftentimes, again, when you're spending the taxpayers' money, other people's money, it's so easy to just, we'll go top shelf, we'll go top of the line, when you can actually look for cheaper alternatives, what you would do with your own money. And so we've done that, looking for cheaper alternatives. Okay, so let me address one counter argument. Someone out there might be thinking, okay, Kris, I see those charts. Yeah, it's true, you cut your budget, and it's true that state spending went up $800 million. But the legislature had to increase it $800 million because the state Supreme Court forced them to spend more money on education. False. The amount of increase that's due to K-12 expenditures is about 300 million of that 800 million increase. So you cannot blame the Supreme Court for that increase. The majority of it, $500 million of it, is due to other things where the legislature has spent more and more money. Okay, third area, and then I'll shut up. Immigration. Now, many of you know that I've done a lot in immigration on a national level, right? So, thank you. Appreciate it. I worked at the Justice Department after 9/11, started actually before 9/11, but starting in September of 2001, and designed the system to track the movements of high-risk visitors in the United States. And within the first year, that system led to the arrest of 11 suspected terrorists and several hundred criminal aliens in the United States. Then after I left the Justice Department, I worked with the state of Arizona, co-authored SB 1070, that big law that went to the Supreme Court. I also co-authored their E-Verify requirement, which was 3 years before SB 1070, which also went to the U.S. Supreme Court and was sustained in its entirety by the U.S. Supreme Court. I represented cities around the country in court that were trying to stop illegal aliens from taking jobs from U.S. citizens. And one of the nearest places I did that was in Fremont, Nebraska, and we won in the 8th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. I also represented 10 ICE agents who sued the Obama administration when President Obama, through executive decree, declared an amnesty for the so-called Dreamers, an illegal act, an unconstitutional act that needed to be challenged in court. And then most recently, as you may know, I have advised President Trump both before his election and after his election on the immigration policies the United States should pursue. And I think he's doing a pretty good job, don't you think? You know, but the one thing that I learned at the Justice Department way back 17 years ago is that, first of all, secure borders are more than just about borders. They affect a lot of other things. If you secure our borders, then you can secure us against terrorism. You can secure us against crime, and you secure American workers against unfair competition from their jobs. So if you get the immigration thing right, then you get a whole bunch of other things right, and it yields great benefits for this country. The other thing I learned is it is such a pervasive law enforcement problem that you can't expect the federal government to do it alone. Take the issue of drugs, illegal drugs, the opium epidemic we have right now. Would anyone say seriously that, oh, hey, that's just the DEA's issue? Yeah, if a local sheriff or a Wichita police officer encounters someone in possession of a large quantity of drugs, they should just, say, too bad, that's a federal issue. No, you have to have state and local cooperation with the feds if you are going to tackle a big law enforcement problem. And illegal immigration is a big law enforcement problem. And so there have been many state and local units of government that have offered their help and have had a great cooperative relationship with ICE. And so we need to foster that. But unfortunately, Kansas has not been moving in that direction. Kansas is the sanctuary state of the Midwest. What do I mean when I say that? Kansas is the only state in the 5-state area that has done nothing to discourage illegal immigration. Colorado, a purple state, has done a lot more than we have to put into place laws that discourage illegal immigration. Missouri and Oklahoma, they're rock stars when it comes to illegal immigration. They have statutes on the books that deny public benefits to illegal aliens, try to keep illegal aliens out of employment, do all kinds of things, encourage cooperation between their highway patrol and ICE. All kinds of things. We have none of that on our books in Kansas. And I've been going to the legislature year after year, long before I was Secretary of State, saying, hey, here's a bill, and testifying. And the bills always get killed. They never even, sometimes they come to a full vote, but of one house, and usually they pass. But rarely does leadership allow those bills to come to a full vote of both houses. If they did, they'd pass, because you would keep your legislators honest and say, hey, why aren't you voting for that bill? But leadership doesn't allow it. So the other thing we do, in addition to not discouraging illegal immigration, is we encourage illegal immigration in Kansas. We are the only state in the 5-state area that gives in-state tuition rates to illegal aliens. It's outrageous, and it has to stop. So get this. You're a kid who's growing up in Missouri. You cross the state line, you decide you want to go to K-State or KU. You are going to pay 3 times as much in tuition as an illegal alien who has been breaking our laws. It has no right to work in Kansas. There's no benefit to us as Kansans from giving that person a subsidized education. Why in the world would we do that? Why would we treat our fellow U.S. citizens who happen to be from a neighboring state worse than an illegal alien? Some of you know I brought a lawsuit back in 2004 on behalf of about 24 out-of-state students at Kansas universities on that very issue. Because it's already illegal under federal law. The state of Kansas is just ignoring federal law when it comes to that. We took the case all the way to the 10th Circuit, and you know what? We got, unfortunately, a rather liberal panel on the 10th Circuit. They said, no standing. Your students don't have standing to bring this issue because they aren't personally injured. Not personally injured. They're paying 3 times as much in tuition and being treated unequally compared to illegal aliens. But it is what it is. And so the court never even heard the merits of the question, which we would have won on easily. The court ducked to the question by saying we didn't have standing. Well, anyway, that's going to end if I'm elected governor. We're going to stop this. So the situation right now where we are encouraging illegal immigration and we are rewarding illegal immigration puts Kansas jobs at risk, and it also puts Kansas lives at risk. One of the people who was at our announcement yesterday is a guy named Dennis Bixby. His daughter, 10 years ago, a young lady named Amanda Bixby, I think she was 21 or 22 years old at the time, she died because it was in Basil, Kansas, just west of Kansas City. She was at an intersection. I think she was coming home from work, and an illegal alien who was either drunk or high on drugs, I can't remember which, T-boned her, crashed, and she died. Now that is a death that would not have occurred if we were enforcing our immigration laws and we were making it harder for illegal aliens to stay in the state of Kansas. There are costs. Some of you may have heard about a Johnson County Sheriff's deputy last year who lost his life. He was shot by an illegal alien. Again, another death that if we were doing a better job of discouraging illegal aliens in the state of Kansas, that death would have been avoided. 2 years ago, there was another illegal alien who went on a shooting rampage in Wyandotte County. He went to a picnic next door and shot a bunch of people at this picnic. Then he fled Wyandotte County, went to Missouri, and I can't remember which county in Missouri where he was apprehended, but in that county, he shot somebody else. I think a total of 6 people were killed. These are deaths that didn't have to happen if we had been doing a better job of discouraging illegal immigration. So there's a cost in human lives. There's a cost in terms of jobs. U.S. citizens lose their jobs to the illegal alien who's taking it. There's a cost in terms of wages. One of the main reasons that wages in the meatpacking industry are so pathetic right now is that illegal labor comes in, willing to work for $8 an hour, willing to work for $7 an hour, and the jobs that used to be enough to sustain a family on are now paying half what they would otherwise because the illegal labor depresses the wages. There's a lot of research on this. An economist at Harvard named George Borjas has done a great deal of research on what happens to wages when illegal labor comes in. And so we need to be protecting Americans, protecting Kansans first. That is so important. So what specifically? Thank you. I'm going to give you a couple numbers and then we'll take questions. So how bad is the problem? Well, guess how much money we spend each year in Kansas in government spending on public benefits for illegal aliens. Anyone heard the number? It's $424 million a year. That's net. That's after you take into account the $18 million, roughly, that we take in from illegal aliens in taxes, mostly sales taxes in Kansas. We still are $424 million in the hole. Well, think of it this way. So the $300 or so million budget hole that the legislators were trying to close, they raised taxes on you to close it rather than looking at a source of $424 million that we're losing. They could have addressed the problem of illegal immigration rather than just charging Kansans with that extra money. That alone would have closed the budget hole. Another statistic, 71% of illegal alien-headed households rely on some form of public welfare or benefits. 71%. As Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize economist, said so famously before he died, he said it's just obvious. You can't have open immigration in a welfare state. You can't have open immigration and a welfare state. Think about it. Because the open immigration swamps the welfare state. You can no longer afford to give out the benefits. And then it's a cyclical relationship because the welfare state attracts more illegal immigration when they realize that they can get the benefits. And that's the cycle we're in right now. So what would I do? First of all, we pass a law that says in Kansas, illegal aliens will no longer get public benefits. Second, we pass a law repealing in-state tuition for illegal aliens. Third, we end sanctuary cities and counties in state. No state funding if those counties want to take that policy. Fourth, we put in place E-Verify protections for U.S. workers to make sure that they're only U.S. legal foreign nationals working in those jobs. And then fifth, we ensure that state and local police in Kansas cooperate fully with ICE to end the problem with illegal immigration. We can solve this problem. All it takes is some leadership and will. Now, you might be thinking, Kris, how can you do that? I mean, you're going to have a legislature that doesn't want to do these things. They aren't doing it on their own. What you do is you have a governor who speaks up on the issue, and you say to the legislature, I want this bill on my desk before the end of the legislative session. You say it publicly, you say it often, and if they don't do it, you tell the legislature, guess what? You don't like it in Topeka? You want to go home? You're staying in Topeka until this bill comes to my desk. I know it can be done because that's exactly, Missouri does some good things, believe it or not, and one thing that Governor Matt Blunt did in Missouri in 2008 was exactly that. There was that bill that I was talking about to make Missouri a tougher place for illegal aliens to break the law. It wasn't coming to his desk, and he told the legislature, you're not leaving town, you're not leaving Jeff City until this bill gets to my desk, and they did. We can do the same thing in Kansas. It just takes determination, it takes will, and we're going to make some big changes in this state if I'm elected. I thank you for your support. We have a short video that I think we're going to play. We're already, the campaign is rolling at full speed, and this is one of the things you can get to, you'll be able to get to it on our website by tonight, so if you want to share it with anybody, you can say, hey, check out this video. Doesn't get to show off my kids. Maybe.
Do you want to take a question while we wait?
Yeah, let's take a question.
Just a reminder, Pachyderm Club guests get to ask questions. The beauty of being a member here, so if you've got a question, hold your hand up so I can see it. We'll start with Bob real quick.
So on term limits, especially thinking of our legislature, what is the legislative path forward, the mechanism by which that might be accomplished, and what would be the role of the governor, if any? And then also, in the past, you've been in favor of referendum and initiative at the state level. Is that still your position? And again, how would that be accomplished and the benefits and so forth?
So I think I am in favor of referendum initiatives. I don't think, however, it will get done in Kansas. It's interesting. So I'm not going to be pushing for something I think is unrealistic. The reason it's unrealistic is all of the states that have initiatives and referendums either had them in their constitution at statehood, or they got them during the populist era of 1890 to 1917. There has been no state that has adopted the popular initiative since 1918 or 1919. So I think that may be a bridge too far, but I do think term limits are not a bridge too far. And you ask a great question, because all of the states west of the Mississippi that adopted term limits did it through popular initiative. Right? I mean, the legislators aren't going to vote to limit their own terms. It's an incredible problem you have. It's a paradox, right? You need to limit the legislators' terms, but the only way to get a constitutional amendment is to have the legislators adopt it. So I think there are a couple of approaches. One approach would be to make the term limits bill. Well, first of all, you have a governor who says, I want it, and makes it a public issue. Because usually, term limits, don't talk about term limits. No, don't talk about it. Don't say term limits. It's just like nobody wants to talk about it. They don't even want to bring it up. So you have a governor who brings it up and says, I want that resolution, constitutional amendment passed. The second thing you do is I think you structure it so that so it only kicks in, the clock of terms only starts counting when the bill is passed. So if you're like Anthony Hensley and you've been there for 40 years, well, guess what, Anthony? You get 8 more years. So you start the clock at the date, so the people who've already served don't have to count their time. You get enough legislators to vote for it because it doesn't hurt them. but it will help our state in the future. So we delay the benefits of term limits a little bit, but you gain a few votes. I think you can get to 2/3 that way. So that would be the approach. We'll see if it works. But, you know, there's a reason we don't have term limits in Kansas, and that's because legislators don't want to limit their own terms. But great question. Are we ready to go to video? Can we dim the light here?
In Kansas, we value hard work, a strong education, personal responsibility, and honesty. These are the things Kris Kobach learned growing up here. He's lived them, embodied them. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 11, he learned that with hard work and determination, you can overcome any obstacle. He became an Eagle Scout, graduated from Washburn Rural High School, volunteered as a big brother, helped to build a school in Africa. Then came a bigger opportunity to serve, a White House fellowship at the Department of Justice, starting in September of 2001.
There's a report of a second hijacked plane heading towards the Pentagon.
Kris and I were newlyweds, and I thought he was at the Pentagon the day of the terrorist attacks. I couldn't reach him. I remember driving home from work, panicked, crying, and worried sick. Nearly 3,000 Americans lost their lives that day. Our way of life, our safety, our security, everything changed. Days later, Attorney General John Ashcroft tasked Kris with finding loopholes in our immigration system that made us vulnerable. The magnitude of that responsibility changed the way Kris felt about everything. It strengthened every aspect of his life. He'll never stop fighting to keep our family safe.
And that's the way it's always been. Kris Kobach has always run toward the problem, never away from it. He's always taken action, always led, never given up. At his core, his values are the same as every Kansan. True to his word, authentic, determined. Sure, sometimes he may shake things up a bit, but isn't that just what Topeka needs?
Let's face it, all the squabbling in Topeka, it hasn't done a thing to make our lives better, and it never will. Today, our state needs a leader who will look you in the eye, shoot straight with you, and face our challenges head on. It's time to lead. That's why I'm running for governor. My goal is for Kansas to lead the nation in every way possible. We can be number one. Let's make it happen. Let's lead again.
Watching that, but I love seeing my kids there. Isn't that drone footage cool? We had a camera on a drone over the field there. But when I said that thing about being number one, that wasn't just a fluffy throwaway line. I really mean that. There's so many areas where they rank the states, right? So when I came in as Secretary of State, some of you heard me say this. I said I want us to be number one. We were middle of the pack on election security. We weren't doing anything in particular to secure our ballots. And now we are one of only 4 states that has proof of citizenship. We're one of only about a dozen states that has robust photo ID. We're one of only, I think, 2 states that has security for our mail-in ballots that is equivalent to photo ID. And we are the only state that has Secretary of State prosecutorial authority on voter fraud. So we are unquestionably the number 1 state. And other states are copying us. Okay, another area about which I care deeply is gun rights. So Guns and Ammo magazine, a magazine I sometimes like to read, ranks the states each year on how friendly they are to firearms owners. Right now, we are number 2. Arizona is ranked number 1 by Guns and Ammo magazine. I think if we pass a few more laws to protect the rights to keep and bear arms, we can be number 1. Let's be number 1 in gun ownership. Same thing on life. So Governor Brownback has really led the way and done a great job on this one. You know, in 2000, say 10 years ago, 2007, we were probably below the middle of the pack because we were the late-term abortion capital of the country. That changed. We've got a bunch of pro-life laws on the books now. Now I think most people think we're in the top 10 in terms of pro-life states. That's an amazing improvement. Well, let's be number 1. number one. I literally want us to be number one. We want to be the number one pro-gun state, the number one pro-life state, and if we can be the number one state in the tax burden, now that's going to be a much bigger hill to climb. Let's just see how high we can get, you know? Let's see how low we can bring our tax burden. So I really, really think it's obtainable. You've got to set goals like that. You know, don't just come in as a politician speaking fluffy words. I want specifics, I want goals, and I'm going to try to meet them. If I can't meet them, I'm going to die trying.
Thank you so much for your time, your attention, your support. I really appreciate it.